Welcome to the Innovating Health podcast. This is your host, Hubert Zajicek. Welcome back to our podcast. I am going to talk about the entrepreneurial spirit today, and that is a very ill-defined term, but in essence, we're just going to talk about what does it take to be successful? What are the traits that are not negotiable? And especially when you're tackling an industry like healthcare, where things are very regulated and things are very and necessarily so for the safety of the patients, very much under control. What type of person do you need to be? What type of group do you need to be to make it in that industry? And I think here at Health Wildcatters, we have a couple of fairly straightforward rules. Number one is we want to see somebody on your team as having a background in healthcare in some way, shape, or form. So that doesn't mean everyone has to be like a neurosurgeon. What we're talking about is some professional knowledge of healthcare. And it doesn't have to be the CEO. It may be somebody else on the C-suite team. But it's very important to us because there is just kind of a very fundamental respect for life and for doing no harm that we would like to see reflected in the team. And that just sets the bar for a certain amount of professionalism that we expect from you, especially in these healthcare startups, and a certain understanding of some of the rules that apply. Now, that does not mean we want you to think small or not break dogmas, but we do want you to at least understand the framework and setup. I've seen many times frustrated, very capable people coming to us and saying, well, I'm going to change all this and I'm going to do away with this and patients need to have more access to this and that. And I don't get me wrong. First of all, I hear you. I mean, it can be extremely frustrating as a patient or caregiver, but just it's not a sheer function of willpower and can-do spirit. You do have to look at the framework in which healthcare exists in this country everywhere. And there are reasons some of these rules are around. So not just do you need to abide by them, like the FDA or patient privacy rules, whatever, but you also need to understand why they exist. And if that fundamental understanding isn't there, and that is something you will learn in medical school, in nursing school, as a healthcare professional, you respect those things. That's really, really important to have on board. Secondly, like to see an appreciation for the things that you can't possibly know in detail and finding others that can fill in these gaps. In healthcare, there are going to be more of those, and I need to see that you understand that. I can't have you be, I mean, I'm sure there are people who can do this, but I can't have you be the FDA expert and the coding expert and the liaison to all patients and stakeholders. You're going to have to pick your battles. You should, as a CEO, know enough to be dangerous in all those things, but you should have people who can help you. So that's important. I think one other way to look at this is to look at some Health Wildcatters entrepreneurs. And now I'm going to step back into a little bit more into some of the nitty-gritty of being a successful entrepreneur. What are some of the traits that I've seen over the years in those who succeed? And one of them, I think most of you aren't going to like this. One of them that is really, really important, and you kind of have to find some way to pull this off. By the way, I'd be terrible at this. So you can still be reasonably successful if you don't have it tackled, is to be very organized. What I mean by that is we had an entrepreneur a few years ago by the name of Suvik Paul. I'll name names today. Yeah, he's awesome, with a company called Ari. And Suvik is just an exceptional individual in that he's extremely organized, extremely professional, and he is not going to stop. And there's absolutely no doubt that that's the case. But at the core of it, early on, was that he was very, very methodical and organized. For instance, he might run across, when he's fundraising, might run across a venture capitalist that he thinks might be a good fit for him. And then he looks at who's connected to this person. And then, I'm sometimes the recipient of that email saying, hey, Hubert, do you know so-and-so? As we all know, not everyone that's on LinkedIn connected with you is your best buddy. So let's gauge and see if you even can get through to this person. And then, would you mind making an intro? But what's more critical about this is he doesn't do it every day or every week or every month, but in rhythms. He respects that people have to do other things as well. And so he comes back every now and then with a request like that, which is a reasonable amount. As a portfolio company, this is what we do. We want to support you as much as we can, but there are limits. So, and he clearly understands that. And it's just one small example. And obviously, I want to give you examples of things that I can relate to, things I've seen personally, things that I've seen work. And so it's an extremely important thing to have on board. Now, how do you tackle this if you're not the chosen super organized person? Well, so like I said earlier, I might not be. I make lists and lists of lists and more lists, and then I check them off all the time. And everyone's got their own time management tools as well, but you ultimately need to learn to delegate. And you also need to have trusted people who can work with you. And so who can those trusted people be? It could be your coworkers. It could be, some sort of assistant. There may be some AI tools in the future that are already in existence now that could help you with some of this, but just ways for you not to forget crucial and important things that you need to continue to work on. We're all subject to that, right? We will chase one thing and we get really excited about getting some traction, and we just don't want to stop on that, but we're also supposed to do this, the second thing and this third thing and this fourth thing today, or at least make a dent there, or at least get the conversation started and get that email out. And so when that is happening, it's sometimes really easy to forget that there are other things you need to be working on as well, and to manage your time well. So time management should be another one we talk about one time in detail. Another thing that I think is extremely important, and I think you can absolutely get there, is to be very persistent, not just organized and continuously working on something, but also persistent. That is a line that some aren't so happy to cross. It depends on your natural inclinations, on your person. Some of us might be more shy to follow up with someone too soon. We don't want to appear as being rude or as too aggressive. And there's a fine line, and ultimately you need to find your own zone where you operate. There is no substitute for that, for being persistent and continuing to go after something or someone that is seminal to your success. And so I would like to see that, and we've had many, many entrepreneurs in this program who have shown that they can do that. And then, of course, another thing that I look for is for someone who's engaging, right? So it is still human to human. And so you need to be engaging, and I'm a people person, where somebody on your team needs to be a people person. And there are plenty of examples in our accelerator of startups where one person fills that role. The other one is the more technical person, and often the technical person ends up being the more organized person. The engaging person maybe more creative or more open to creative solutions. And so it's really beautiful when you have at least a team of two that are complementary skills. But that's just a couple of things that I think are important, especially in healthcare. They're important in all entrepreneurial ventures, but especially in healthcare. So, one of the questions is how do entrepreneurs deal with the complex regulatory landscape, including FDA approvals and so on and so forth? And that's a question I get quite a bit too, like how do I handle this? And first of all, the thing is, you can't, obviously, if your whole premise is to break rules that are laws, then we're probably in trouble. But I'm not saying think small. I'm cool to think big, but you better have a game plan if it's required that there's some sort of a law change happening. Very difficult to sell to investors that you are doing something and you're waiting for the laws to be changed to accommodate your startup's ability to actually do something. Sometimes these laws can seem to be already in motion, and it appears that they would be implemented within months. We have at least one startup in our accelerator that has chased that for many years now. There's a law, it's on the books, and then it gets pushed out every year and it does not get enforced. So, if you have some gray hair on board, you got a few people on your advisory board or some mentors that have been around, then they will be able to whistle you back pretty quick and say, yes, it's fine to be enthusiastic about your solution. It's great to be optimistic about what you're tackling, and that there's a new law that can, help accelerate what you're doing. But it's good to have some experienced people on board because they will also say, by the way, sometimes even if it's already written in law, it may not get enacted, or it may not get prosecuted, or it can be retracted. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can happen. And you need to be aware of that, because if everything rests on that and you think everything's hunky-dory because that law is already passed and it'll be enacted January 1st, and then it doesn't happen, then you got a big problem. So the complexities, our approach is to have professionals on board with you side by side that you can trust. On the regulatory side, I think that's not negotiable, that you have to have some sort of a regulatory expert. I mean, it's very, very, very rare that you can cover that angle 100%. And even if you can, if you go into these regulatory meetings where you have a pre-submission meeting with FDA, you need to get through, it's just invaluable to have somebody by your side who has the experience, who's done this a few times before, who knows how to get prepared for such a meeting, who knows to have the answers to some of the most obvious questions you're going to get asked. It's not an intelligence test. It's about having done it before and knowing what to expect. And to boot, even if you know all the answers, there is value in having a professional by your side, just so the other side knows that you have that type of help by your side. It just means that FDA, for instance, or an investor is very experienced that's trying to do diligence on you, can say, there's someone, yes, maybe the C-suite has figured it all out, but there's also someone at their side that is giving me confidence that they have this figured out or tackled. So I think that's FDA is a good one because it's very unique to healthcare. And there are other ones that have to do with kind of decisions you have to make around manufacturing, a prototype, and clinical trials. And those are all instances where it's really, really good to have the capabilities to get you to the prototyping stage with kind of cobbled together resources or friends and family and whatnot. But when it comes to it, to get investors excited, you need to show that you can do it professionally. And so that's something that I strongly encourage you to do. Another thing that very often comes across is, you will draw this line that goes from the left lower corner to the right upper corner on your chart. And, here you're right now here in the left lower corner, and surely in 12 months, you'll be up in the right upper corner. And this is your path, and it's a straight line. And as you have probably heard many times, it never is a straight line. I would say in many cases, you could just look back at your life and your own experiences, and has everything gone exactly the way you thought it was going to go? Or even if it was supposed to, did it actually go down that way? There were setbacks, right? I mean, the obvious ones would be crisis in the family and divorce, or somebody passes away, or some grave diseases. So those are little things you or your family had to overcome. And so it will be for your startup. That is not me saying that things won't go great. Maybe they do. And maybe they go even better than you ever expected. But you need to be aware and understand that they rarely do. Then if they do, that's an outlier. So you shouldn't prepare for something that's not a common scenario. What you should prepare for is to understand that there will be obstacles. And one of the entrepreneurial main traits you need to develop or have is a thick skin and ability to adapt to these challenges along the way. And by the way, in life, it's not all that different. So some really big things happen, and it makes you think about a lot of things your whole life, right? I mean, a close loved one dies. That's a point where you often will think about, well, do I really want to do what I do right now? So these type of existential things can happen in your startups, and they will very likely happen. And you will have reason to think about how to tackle things. When I think about all the startups in our accelerator, 118 to date, they each have tackled or are tackling a problem that's a major problem in healthcare. Some are on the mundane side, meaning they're dealing with beauty or they're dealing with perception. Most of them are dealing with some hardcore healthcare problems or health IT problems. They really have impact on hundreds and thousands and millions of people, and undoubtedly many of them will in the future touch tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people's lives, just with these 118, adding 10 to that every year. But some of the things that, when you think about all the problems that are out there, and you might be thinking about a particular one right now that you're wanting to tackle, I think one of the hardest things to do is to raise or have to try to build a startup that has I would call it an unsexy pitch. And what I mean by that is it's hard to understand. You're solving a core problem in healthcare, but it's very difficult for you to convey to anyone but a few specialists what that actually means. And I just want you to understand that that can be the case, right? Somebody can say, for instance, we're developing, so number one, it could be a simple problem. Like we're making a new type of crown for teeth. It's going to be much easier to implant. Almost anyone can relate to that. You don't need to be a specialist or a dentist to understand that. And if there's some really cool secret sauce around it, man, awesome. Angel investor wants to go in, others want to go in. In other cases, it can be a problem that's got a really difficult setup because you're going to spend a minute just explaining the problem to a lay population or even to a somewhat educated healthcare population because they don't know about the disease that you're talking about or the problem that you're talking about. That is a major thing. Not many people want to invest in, I don't know, some sort of a hard to explain surgical improvement in, I don't know, splicing together the colon, let's say, after a certain procedure or surgery. Don't get me wrong, the specialists will be all over it and love it, but there is a gap to bridge. And that is your first investors, finding those that are willing to bridge you. So all the way to the point at which you can talk to, let's say, rectal and colorectal surgeons that would do this type of surgery. Very hard to get to these people. They will understand and love it, but that's further down the pipe. And you're talking about raising money now to even get started. So this is a difficult situation because unless you know these people, how do you get to them without having created some of the results that they need to see? So it becomes a chicken and egg situation. But even so, that's still potentially explainable. In some other cases, the setup of the problem is even harder, meaning you're not even talking about just an organ in your body or a very commonly known problem. Most people or many people will have heard about resections of parts of your gut and that they have to be reconnected. I mean, it's understandable, right? We all eat, and we know that all that has to go through our body, and we understand that something could happen, and you might have to slice a piece out and then plug it back together. By the way, I'm totally making this one up. There is no startup of ours that does this thing. So, but it could get worse. It could get worse because you might be explaining an improvement upon a technique that saves lives, but most or many people don't really understand how that works. And that would be, for instance, an example would be VenoStent, one of our startups that are dealing in the dialysis field. So technically they're not, it's a vascular solution, but just hear me out on that. These guys, Tim and Jeff, have to explain, not anymore. Now they are talking to all the professionals now. They've raised millions of dollars. They're in great position to execute. But early on, how dialysis works, what dialysis is, and by the way, it is if your kidneys fail, you have to basically clear the blood of toxins, and your kidneys will filter out a lot of the toxins. If they don't work anymore, you basically have to be hooked up to a machine, a dialysis machine, 3 times a week, and they poke some really big needles into you. They transfer the blood out, clean it in the dialysis machine, and then return it to you. This takes several hours. A long procedure is a very costly procedure. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. So not just do you have to understand that is happening and why, and that millions of people have to do this today, but then you have to understand how it works. And that is, in this case, you have to create a connection between an artery and a vein. Now, in order to understand that that's a problem, is you have to understand that these two vessels, the artery brings the blood to, let's say, your limbs, and the veins transport it back to your heart. You have to understand that these two vessels are very different. One is very thick-walled, the other one is thin-walled. So it'd be like connecting a garden hose to like a glove, like material-wise, very different. So this is happening right now. You have to go through a surgery that does that, connects these two things, the artery and the vein. You have to splice them together. You have to wait for that wound to heal. That'll happen usually in your elbow here. And that's a major procedure. And then And if Tim or Jeff are watching, please don't, I'm making it very simple sounding here, but anyway, that wound has to heal, and then several months later you can start using dialysis. So this is a very precarious thing. Trouble is, these connections very often go wrong. They dissolve, they clot up. There's a lot of things that go wrong. On average, many of these fail every single year. So to their credit, VenoStand has looked at that problem, and Tim and Jeff have come up with a solution that reinforces that connection. Again, think about the garden hose. I'm not sure that this is the best, by the way, the best analogy. So, but anyway, we'll just stick with it for now. The garden hose and the glove. Imagine you are wrapping some sort of a special film around it, like a Flex Seal or, some sort of a duct tape around the connection after you sew it up or you saw that into the connection. And imagine that is a product that would be absorbed over time. And it strengthens the connection because very often these things can fail early and then it just dissolves itself. Okay, well, I don't know. That was like 90 seconds probably now, or maybe 2 minutes for me to even explain what it is I'm trying to say to get to that solution, which is that wrap that they're making. But here's the kicker. Talk about unsexy, right? This is just not something. Do you want to be the guy that talks about that at a cocktail conversation? No, you don't. Unless you're a nephrologist or a vascular surgeon that deals with these problems all the time, this is just not going to be something you talk about. So very difficult to get general angels excited about it. But here's the thing. When you start doing the math, and not just the math being the money's saved with this type of technology, if it works, and it appears to work, by the way, then it becomes unbelievable amount of money that can be saved by reinforcing this connection is clearly in the billions of dollars. And that's just money saved for everyone that's involved, the insurance providers, the federal government that pays for a lot of that, individuals. And we're not even talking about human suffering. We're not even talking about how blessed patients would be if this connection held up several years as opposed to on average, 1 or 2 years. That is massive amounts of pain and suffering avoided, massive amounts of expenditures avoided, quality of life improved. So this is such a unsexy thing. Sorry, Tim and Jeff, I know you'll probably think it's the coolest. I do think it's the coolest thing ever too, but to call it such, yet it's going to have an impact that is, way beyond many of the coolest things you see. So that's the crux of a healthcare startup. You might end up having to explain something. Your ability to tell that story is absolutely seminal. You have to connect with people, you have to keep their attention, not lose it, and find analogies and ways to explain what it is you're doing. And that can be very frustrating if you're a professional. You just question, what the world has come to. Why isn't everyone excited about this? If you're a nephrologist, for instance, you would be very excited about this type of solution. But because you see these patients every single day. So that's just an example of a business problem solved that is needed a lot of explanation to get to the people that need less of that explanation that will then absolutely love it and want to fund it further. There's a little bit of a disconnect early on to find such people that are willing to back you. And we were proud backers and having doubled down on VenoStand. So it's a great success story. I want to pivot a little bit into, we're still talking about entrepreneurs and what it takes, but as we're running an accelerator here, we have a lot of mentors involved. And sometimes I get asked how to become a mentor and all, what do they do? What's your process for matching them? And the answer is somewhat deflating for a lot of people that ask me that question, because the answer, number one, is the normal pathway to become a mentor is to be an investor. So in other words, almost all of our investors are also willing to not just write a check, but also give some of their time to help these startups. And that's a huge deal. And that's really our core focus is on such investors that are also willing to be mentors. That does not mean they have to be specialists in healthcare. They don't have to be doctors, nurses. They could be, or healthcare executives. They could be completely different entrepreneurial people. Very often it's important to have them in a room, someone who's not a healthcare professional, just to make sure the entrepreneur stays on point with explaining the thing that they're trying to convey to investors in a understandable way without lingo and jargon. But when you look at all these mentors that we have involved here, that process of matching is a messy one. We have these over 300 people who are wonderful, a great gift of theirs to take some of these meetings. And we just say, hey, would you be willing to take a bunch of meetings with these 10 startups in our accelerator on these days in rapid succession? And it's kind of the mentor matching period. Dozens and dozens of these mentors show up for that, and hundreds of meetings result out of that in one cohort. I mean, it's 500-700 meetings, just mentors and startups during one cohort. And then, as the program progresses, there are more interactions between various mentors and startups. And ultimately, when the program ends, this doesn't end. We continue to match mentors with startups. You might ask yourself, well, what do you mean so many of them? That's crazy. The answer is every single one of them is potentially a good fit for you to help you with one single thing, to understand who you are, what you do. They might have that one piece of advice, that one connection that makes a difference for your startup. And our program obviously has to come to an end, but that doesn't mean that our support ends. Our support won't end. And by the way, the more our startups engage with us, the more we can give them. So our reach goes far beyond the program. And so the mentoring process also is informal. Just see who we tell the mentors, whichever startup you like, see what happens. If they call you back, hopefully you're an organized startup, so you're following up with this mentor is very valuable, and then the mentor shouldn't do the work, but they might meet again for another meeting, and there's more information exchange. Ultimately, we are happy for our mentors to engage with the startups, but not till after the program is over. During the program, it is a gift. It's a gift to these startups that these mentors are making time for them. And so that's kind of how it works. Everyone's a grown-up and an adult. Nobody's, I don't require special reports at the end of the program. Wow, how was the experience? I do ask my mentors, I do ask my startups. We don't torture anyone with like any kind of reports. But that's also a privilege because the people that have entered our pool over a dozen years now as mentors are people we've known for a long time. These are people we trust. These are people we have gotten to know. And these are very accomplished people. You may or may not be possible for you to ever even get a meeting with many of them, because that's just not what they do. But during this program, they're willing to take the meeting. And so that's a huge gift. And this is just one of the things that creates an advantage for you. And when you evaluate accelerators, look at everything they do. But most importantly, are the people that lead this thing involved? Are they invested? Literally, maybe, but definitely figuratively speaking. Is the program continuing to add support to the startups over years to come? Those are things that are important. For me, ultimately, it's always the human connections. It's how did the stories between mentors and startups and how they got to know each other and helped each other. By the way, it goes the other way too. As a mentor, many of you are mentors probably. You know that you're getting a lot back too. Even though you're designated the mentor, you're learning a lot from these startups. And I've done that too through my own mentoring activity, not just here at Health Lockheaders, but also at SMU, for instance, where I volunteer, and in other organizations where I'm willing to take meetings with people who need advice, or my open office hours where I do that just for pretty much anyone. So I enjoyed, and you undoubtedly know that is a big part of the allure to become a mentor in any kind of organization. And so I hope this helped a little bit in setting some of the parameters of what's required to be successful, some of the little things that can help you. And if you're not an accelerator, then maybe you should look for some people that are mentors that could help you. See if your investors might be willing to help you, ask for advice, get as many inputs. It's team sport. Healthcare startups is, I think, a notch up from your regular startup in that it's complex and you need a lot of friends. And so I wish you all the best in your endeavors. And till next time, have a great and successful rest of the day and make it happen out there. Godspeed. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Innovating Health podcast. Be sure to follow, give us 5 stars, and subscribe to stay updated to the latest cutting-edge innovations and revolutionary ideas shaping the future of healthcare.